The legend of John Henry, the steel driving man. John raced a steam-powered rock drill on top of Oak Mountain near the city of Leeds, Alabama in September of 1887, and he won. The real story is quite interesting. A simple idea created to promote a product that turned into a legacy. The legend of John Henry is a combination of information obtained by my grandfather, E.L. Voiles, a lifetime railroad veteran who came to the Sandy Division of Seaboard Airline in 1912, 25 years after the famous race between John Henry and the rock drill. He worked with men in 1912 with knowledge of the events relating to the race. Between 1912 and 1914, he made a lot of friends with dozens of Central of Georgia and Southern Railway employees. These employees shared first-hand knowledge of what actually happened on Oak Mountain in 1887. And my father, H.B. Voiles, who spent 44 years with Seaboard before retiring in the mid-70s. He carried me to the site of the race in 1959, and I saw the steel rod sticking up out of the ground. On the cap of the rod, BS-16 was stamped. Now, my father told me that meant a 16-foot steel rod manufactured by Bethlehem Steel. The rod was about 2 feet above the ground. So, for the record, John Henry had hammered his set of steel rods 14 feet into the rocks of Oak Mountain. Steel drivers in 1887 played an important role in building America's railroads. Columbus and Western Railway was quickly building into Birmingham to tap into the coal, ore, and limestone deposits located nearby. They needed 2 tunnels to reach Birmingham. One was Coosa Tunnel, known as the Long Tunnel. The other was Oak Tunnel, the Short Tunnel. Oak Tunnel is where John Henry raced the steam-powered rock drill September 30th of 1887. The construction crew building the railroad for Columbus and Western Railway was really out of money, and they were using old-fashioned construction techniques. A salesman named W.X. Stevens was traveling from Calera, Alabama to Dallas, Georgia in the late summer of 1887 to deliver new and improved versions of the rock drill to his customers when he decided to stay overnight at the Lakeview Hotel on the south side of Birmingham. While in the bar at the Lakeview, he ran across 3 local investors who were involved in the mining business. One of the investors told him about John Henry, and when he learned that John Henry was living at Donovan's Camp, only 20 miles from Birmingham, he quickly made a plan to sell rock drills. The plan was to sell his entire annual quota of rock drills in one day. He decided to do this by challenging John Henry to a race against his steam-powered rock drill. It was a good plan, but it didn't work. John was living in a temporary tent set up at Donovan's Camp, a large rail camp located about 3 miles from the newly formed city of Leeds. Columbus and Western had built 3 rail camps to construct their line, and Donovan's Camp was the largest, housing over 1,000 workers. Steel driving teams in 1887 were the kingpins of rail workers. The job was tough. A steel driving team consisted of 3 workers, a loader, a shaker, and a driver. The team was responsible for drilling holes up to 20 feet deep into large rocks and mountains. The holes were later filled with dynamite and blasted to remove rock and debris. This process was required to build level roadbeds. Steel driving teams used a series of solid steel rods to create holes. The steel rods were in 2-foot increments. There was a 2-foot rod, 4 foot, 6 foot, 8 foot, all the way up to 20 feet in length. The way they would do this, the shaker would take the first 2-foot rod, hold it over the predetermined mark for the hole, and the steel driver would hit the top of the rod with a sledgehammer over and over and over and drive it deeper and deeper into the hole. Once they reached 8 to 10 inches above ground level, the loader, who used a wooden hoist because the steel rods were quite heavy, would take out the 2-foot section and replace it with a 4-foot section. And the whole process would start over again, and they would do this over and over until they reached their desired depth. The railroad arranged a day for Mr. Stevens to demonstrate the power and durability of the steam-powered rock drill. That day was Friday, September 30th, 1887. 3 special Georgia Pacific trains departed Birmingham's Union Station at 6:30 in the morning, headed for Leeds, Alabama. The trains were loaded with mining executives, investors, and dignitaries. No press members were invited because Mr. Stevens expected John Henry to lose. And since a rock drill would replace dozens of workers, he feared miners and rail workers suddenly left without jobs would cause problems for companies buying rock drills. Once the trains arrived in Leeds, passengers boarded stagecoaches for the short ride over Oak Mountain to the site of the race. They arrived at the race site about 7:30 in the morning, and they watched Mr. Stevens demonstrate the power and accuracy of the rock drill. The race with John Henry featured a steam-powered version of the rock drill. The drill was mounted to a tripod stand with adjustable legs. The tripod legs will come into play later in the race. September 30th, 1887 was hot, muggy, with scattered showers in the forecast. Mr. Stevens was busy demonstrating the drill. At 8 o'clock sharp, the captain rang the bell to start the race. They were using the dinner bell that normally sounded the start of the evening meal at Donovan's camp. Reuben, John's shaker, picked up a 2-foot steel rod and placed it on a predetermined mark on the ground. He held on tight with both hands. As John made his first swing, bam! The rod sank about an inch into the ground. John swung again, and the steel rod sank another inch into the ground. The race was on. John's steel driving team and the rock drill were making history. By the time Mr. Stevens got his protective clothing on, John Henry and his shaker Reuben had reached a depth of 10 inches. The drill hissed and groaned as it pounded steel rods into the mountain. Mr. Stevens was feeling good about the progress of the race. A brief morning shower soaked the mountain. Here's where the trouble starts. The tripod legs supporting the rock drill started to slip and slide on the wet rocks. Mr. Stevens was making continuous adjustments to keep the rock drill steady. Meanwhile, the cool rain energized John Henry. John looked over at the rock drill and nodded to Mr. Stevens. For 3.5 hours, John struck the steel rod over and over with unbelievable accuracy, while Mr. Stevens fought to keep the mechanical drill stable and steam flowing from the boilers. The lunch bell sounded at 11:30 and temporarily stopped the race. The rock drill received a heavy dose of lubricants. During the 30-minute lunch break, Mr. Stevens saw John's loader pull out a 10-foot rod. Now this meant that John had reached 9 feet after 3.5 hours. He saw John laughing and joking around with his fellow rail workers. He realized for the first time that John Henry had a shot at winning. After lunch, the race resumed. John Henry and his shaker Reuben hammered steel rods with a determination never witnessed before. Mr. Stevens fought with the steam drill all day long, while John Henry and Reuben just continually struck the steel rod, one strike after another, hitting it, driving it deeper into the rocks. At 3 in the afternoon, the race was called off, and John Henry was proclaimed the winner, but it came at a price. When the race was over, John Henry had driven a 16-foot steel rod 14 feet into the ground. The steam-powered rock drill, it barely made 10 feet that day. John fell to his knees and cried out, "I can't see!" John collapsed on the ground. Reuben attempted to revive John by throwing buckets of water on him. The railroad workers carried him down the mountain so that he could spend time with his wife, Polly Ann. She was the chief cook at Donovan's camp. The captain came down, and he met with John. John said, "Did I beat the steam drill?" The captain said, "Yes, you did, John. You beat it by 4 feet. Within minutes, John was dead. It was the first time that man competed with a machine, and man won. John Henry beat the steam-powered rock drill September 30th, 1887 at Oak Mountain near Leeds, Alabama.